work, just to make the point. And paving. Look at the age of this individual. There's no retirement. You understand, undocumented, although they pay in the Social Security system, are not eligible to get a Social Security check if you're undocumented. Although they pay millions of dollars into the system, they're not able to retrieve that money at all. One of the qualities, one of the enrichments that Latinos bring is their food. Ooh, we like their food. This happens to be Joe T. Garcia. Jose Talofo Garcia came over in 1916, worked at Swift and Armor, and his uncle opened up a grocery store. You know where Joe T's is right now? On Commerce? Opened a grocery store there. And what they would do is they would sell to the local Latinos, but Mama Jesusita, his Joe T's wife, was a great cook and in the Michoacan style. So she would prepare meals and people would come and they made more money from her cooking than they did from the grocery. So what ended up happening, Joe was smart. He took his wife's lunches, she would have her prepare them and would take them over to Swift and Armor and start selling them. And they fell in love with it. So much to the fact that he opened Joe's Place. It wasn't called Joe T, it was called Joe's Place. And it just took off. That's how it eventually became a really, really successful business, because based on her, to the point where they opened their house where they lived and started serving the food. And I'm not sure, I think this may be Jesusita, I'm not sure, this may be Joe. But look at the audience is predominantly Anglo patronage, was Anglo patronage. One of the studies that I've read said that Joe T, anytime up until the 50s, anytime a Latino from the neighborhood, even relatives, if they wanted to eat at Joe T's, they had to come in through the kitchen entrance. And they had to eat in the kitchen. They can like our food, but they don't want us eating with them, what it came down to. So even Joe T made an economic decision that my business is going to thrive as long as I stay and play within the rules. And therefore, he only served Anglos up until the 1950s. Then they opened it up, and you can go eat there now. It's good food. I've eaten there myself. So. And the daughter, I think, is still there. I think a son-in-law, the Lancarte, son-in-law, Lancarte, took over the business and is now doing that. But and this is just one example. There were a number of people, the Rodriguezes, for example, the Polidos, who went ahead and started working as day laborers in different institutions, but their real gift was their food, their cooking abilities, and started establishing these food industries, and it just took off. And they just opened Polido's restaurants, you've heard of that, right? That they just took off, and that's how they made their money, as a result of parlaying a cultural cuisine that they had into something that was very appreciative of other people. This is very momentous, I think. Elias Rios, in June of 2016, was the first Latina firefighter in Fort Worth. She's a native to Northside. She graduated from Northside High School and decided that she wanted to be a firefighter. She rode at one time, somebody gave her a ride on a fire truck, fell in love with it. And you know, it's difficult for women to get into this type of career field because it's very strenuous and you have to be able to lift and there are no lowering of standards. But she went up there and she did it. And I saw a video of her. That lady can press some weight. I mean, she was doing more than me. I mean, she could probably pick me up and then throw me around. But she was determined and became the first Latina firefighter. Why do I demonstrate this? Because again, we aspire to, once you're here, you start seeing the opportunities. And if you can overcome those systemic obstacles which is very, very hard. You can't live on this side of the street. We didn't talk about the schooling. The schooling was very restrictive. They would punish you, even in the Catholic school, if you spoke Spanish in the classroom. Not even the classroom. If you spoke Spanish on the playground, you would be punished. Today, being bilingual is an asset. You know, if you learn multiple languages, especially, and this is not being a traitorous statement, you learn Chinese, that is a benefit. If you learn foreign languages, it is a benefit to you, your company, and your country, because then you can communicate with other people. Whether they're friend or foe, it's good that you can communicate with them. But we decided that we were going to be real restrictive and not allow Spanish to be spoken. Someone told me, and I read this, is that she took, I saw this in a video, she was forbidden to speak Spanish and she would get punished. But yet she thought she could speak Spanish, and then she failed her Spanish course. But they won't let me speak Spanish. But I failed only in Spanish class. She failed it. That didn't make sense. So we became different individuals. Now I'm getting to Mr. Diaz. This is Mr. Santiago Diaz, this gentleman right over here. 21 years old. He's from originally Jalisco. He comes over at 5 months. As I said, the story, his older siblings died of malnutrition. Forced out by, his parents were forced out by the Mexican Revolution. Came over, undocumented, and lived in Fort Worth for a while. He took a job with Acme Coffee Company, washing cars, right? While he was at the movie theater with his future wife-to-be, Pearl Harbor was bombed. It broke out throughout the country. So he had got married, he had a child, he enlisted, 27. Enlisted, he was sent to become a medic. And he got training in Illinois, and they originally were going to send him to Europe. They changed their orders. We're sending you to the Pacific. So they sent him to Louisiana, because in Illinois there are no jungles. So he went to Louisiana to get used to that atmosphere. He trained as a medic. First destination, Guadalcanal. He goes to Guadalcanal. Mr. Diaz has said this. My eyes aren't probably as good as his, but there's supposedly skulls behind here as a result of the fighting that had gone on. Mr. Diaz's job was to fight mosquitoes. Malaria was a plague for the soldiers. So he had to go out there, and his crew would go out there and eliminate all the mosquitoes, because once they occupied that island, they had to stay there, right? You're not going to give it up, because it became a landing strip for the Allies, or for the Americans when they would go on and bomb Japan or other enemy positions. So they were going to keep it, but to keep those soldiers healthy, you needed to eliminate the malaria, so you needed to eliminate the mosquitoes. So Mr. Diaz's job and his other medics was to find out and kill those mosquitoes. He stayed there till the end of the war, until 1945, when he became a citizen of the United States. He had served his country. He was an undocumented individual, joined up, and the United States Army decided that he was worthy of becoming a United States citizen. And they gave him citizenship. He took the oath on Guadalcanal. This is Mr. Diaz. He celebrated his 100th birthday on September 2nd. He's 101. Mr. Diaz. I think I saw some writing from Mr. Diaz. Mr. Diaz is bilingual. He writes in Spanish and English, and I've read some of his Spanish writing. But his daughter, Carlota, who's back there, who really is his primary caretaker, Carlota asked him, what do you attribute your long life? Vegetables, fruits, and a little beer. Still goes to the Senior Citizen Center, has a sharp mind, still plays dominoes. He's now in a spelling bee contest. I want to be like Mr. Diaz. Moving on. Discrimination. These signs were everywhere. Some of you may have seen if those of you who have been around in the Leonard, the Monig's stores where it said white only, colored only stores. The concern, my wife told me this and others have told me this, that when they would go to the stores, they would ask their parents, I'm confused, am I colored or am I white? And one of them had to go to the bathroom real quick, so I got to go to the bathroom. And they went into the colored bathroom, so-called colored bathroom, sat down. The African-American lady said, what are you doing in here? I gotta pee. Not in here. And they would escort her out because, again, when you're a child, you don't understand. So Mexican Americans were kind of in limbo. Which way do you go? Which way do you go? Whereas pretty distinct with African Americans, which way you would do this. This is true. This is Jim Crow that existed in Fort Worth, and Mexican Americans were brought up with this. Heard stories. Rita Utt is an attorney. She grew up in Worth Heights. Her grandmother, who was Native American, big bone lady, strong, or Native American looking, excuse me, big bone lady, would go downtown to Fort Worth, but she was a very strong lady. She didn't speak English, but she could cuss in English, but she couldn't speak English. She would take the young Rita downtown because she was adventurous, and they would go, and in those days, dark-skinned people sit in the back, light-skinned people can sit in the front, but if you were African American or dark-skinned, you go to the back. Her grandmother would sit wherever she pleased and would do that. Rita learned that she was of good stock, that she was brave, she was respected, coming from her grandmother who could not speak English, other than cussing English, but she could not speak English. And therefore she would role model basically for Rita on what it was to be a strong woman. But that was reality back in those days. So this is a Judge Reyes, I don't know what time it is, who made a statement. One of the few Latino magistrates that in order to be fair and unbiased, sometimes you have to understand the culture. And if you come from a narrow background and you've not been exposed to different cultures, then there may be an influence of not understanding why people do what they do. And Judge Reyes said, that's why we need more diversity in all fields, in all professions, and in our judiciary. This is a cartoon. You remember Etta Hume used to be a cartoonist for the Star Telegram? Okay, this was one. I don't know if you guys could read this. Trabajando por usted. Can I work for you, sir? Oh, sure. Work for me? You bet. Pago seguridad? What is that? Seguridad social? Seguro. I thought it should be seguro social, but it's Social Security. You pay Seguro? Yes, indeed, we handle that. Pago income tax? You pay it? Certainly, we'll hold. How about my kids going to school? No, you lost me on that one. My handy Facebook is on that. In 1971, the Texas legislature passed a law that said that if you are you have to be a citizen to go to the schools, or they would not fund a school district for those children who were undocumented. That was a law that they would not. So school districts, you had to make a decision. Either they not admit those kids or they charge them. And so, for example, in Fort Worth, they weren't admitting the kids. I know a friend who, not a friend, an acquaintance, who said she remembers being told you can't come back to school. And she didn't understand why, so she went home and the kids, because she was undocumented, and they were playing out in front. This was in the Worth Heights area. She was going to Worth Heights. And Anglo neighbors across the street would see them outside and said, what are you doing out of school? Today's school. We can't go to school. They won't let us. And the parents didn't know what to do. So, because they were undocumented. So the Anglo neighbor went to the school and said, no, you're going back to school. And took it upon herself to advocate for those children and said, these kids need to be in school. I don't care about that law. You put these kids in school. And they were allowed to go in school. Miss Ott told me a story that back in Worth Heights Day, on the other side of Hemphill, there was a school. In the 40s, the children were allowed to go to the school. Go to the school. They were not allowed to go inside the school. So the kids were taught outside the school. On cold, rainy days, they were allowed to go into the basement until a parent complained to, at that time, was Trimble, I believe, Green, is that his name? Greenby Trimble. And they told him, and he said, no, I don't think we're going to be allowed to do that anymore. Let those kids be allowed to go into the regular classrooms, because you can't keep them in the basement. It's not healthy. So they finally allowed them to go into the regular classrooms. As I mentioned before, it was a common practice to punish children when Spanish is their first and only language, to punish children when they're speaking Spanish in the classroom or in the playground. And we understand the need to learn English. Of course, that's important. I'm not saying we should not. But what's the message we give a child when they can't even communicate in the language that is supposedly needing to be spoken in the classroom? They're fumbling. If we put you in Russia and had you try to learn Russian from the get-go, and if you didn't know how to speak Russian, you're going to get your knuckles cracked. That would be very frustrating. So you're dealing with children in the very formative years being told, being punished, that Spanish is not acceptable. You go home and they're just speaking Spanish. So what tactic did some of the parents play? What the tactics they would do is they would say, I'm going to learn English and Spanish will not be spoken in this house any longer. We're only going to speak English because I don't want you suffering anymore like I suffered. Like I've suffered, I don't want you suffering. So if you ever encounter people who look like me and they don't know how to speak Spanish because you're expecting them to speak Spanish, it's not because they don't want to speak Spanish, it's because that was not encouraged or permitted. What they were taught, the message is, if you want to be acceptable, if you want to be professional, if you want to look respectable and be treated with respect, then speak English and speak English well, preferably without an accent. Because then you become considered an American, an acceptable American. That's the reality that children faced back then, and some of the adults here in this, Latino adults, experienced that. They could testify to that personally of how it transpired. So you wonder sometimes why we're confused. Why are we frustrated? This got changed, by the way. Here's another one. Looks like states' rights to Ronald Reagan. The 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment. You remember that law? That amendment, which allowed, why was it in? It was implemented after the Civil War in order to allow African Americans to be considered full citizens. They passed the 14th Amendment. But they had a full citizenship clause, or excuse me, equal rights clause, that says that you do not abandon your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all the rights and privileges that comes with that. Well, and they ended up having to go to the Supreme Court. Excuse me, they passed the 14th Amendment and said that that you had to allow children, regardless of their status, into the schools. And it eventually passed. And so Fort Worth School District, as I said, would not allow children who were undocumented. They even had clandestine night schools. Teachers in Fort Worth would gather and have classes for the kids who were not allowed into the classrooms in order to get around this. They did different things all over the country to try to accommodate the children who were forbidden. What happened was that in Tyler, there was a superintendent who decided on, can't remember the exact year, but on September, when the children came back to school, he had all the Latino children round up who were not undocumented and sent home. Go home. You're not going to be here in school this year because of this. Or pay us $1,000 for tuition. These were poor people. They could not afford the $1,000 tuition. So what happened was a local social worker, yay, went ahead and contacted a local attorney who then contacted the Mexican American Legal Education Defense Fund. It's called MALDEF. And MALDEF went ahead and filed a suit. It's called Plylor, P-L-Y-L-O-R, who was the superintendent, versus Doe, because they wanted to keep the identity the families anonymous so they wouldn't have repercussions. And basically they filed a lawsuit. Went all the way, that sucker went all the way to the Supreme Court. And they prevailed. But it had to take a Supreme Court ruling for that law to be outlawed. So it started in Texas, right? Texas is always first in things. So it started in Texas, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and said it's unconstitutional. You cannot have that law. So kids are allowed back in school. This is just Sam Garcia. He wrote a little briefing here about getting federal funds. Ronald Reagan decided then to release $30 million to assist. Because the state, what they were saying is, we don't have the funds to be teaching these extra kids. We're not trying to be cruel. We understand kids need to get an education, but we don't have the funds. So federal government, you make these laws, but you don't fund them. So Ronald Reagan said, here's $30 million, be quiet. So he gave him funds. It's still an issue though, is it not? Funding is still an issue. You remember, I don't know if some of you have been around long enough, Betty Andujar? She was married to, Andujar is Spanish by the way, but she's married to a physician. She herself wasn't a physician. She was married, she was a legislature, Senate. So see the cartoon here, C-Spot Run, English primer, Hispanics. What was going on is that Latinos would end up, Spanish-speaking Latinos would end up in the emergency room and they would do a wallet biopsy. You've heard of that? They want to know, let me see how much money you got. Can you afford this? Emergency room, the guy's bleeding. How much can you pay? So what they would do, for the people who couldn't speak Spanish, they couldn't answer the questions, so they wouldn't get treated. So the legislature, a guy named Gonzales Barrientos, put in a bill that says it would be a felony for any healthcare institution and physician who does not treat an individual because they cannot afford to pay. It would be a felony if you did that. So they had what they call in those days, maybe they still do, called a tag rule, which means that if you tag a bill, you have to wait 48 hours before that bill can be reconsidered. She put a tag on this particular bill within 24 hours of when the session was going to end. In essence, killing the bill. So she was a local representative. And so they asked her, was this because your husband's an attorney? And she says, no, you guys keep on putting that up to my face. You know, it's nothing to do with him. I just think that we have to be careful about starting to sue our doctors and our healthcare institutions. And in fact, what she said was, they need to learn how to speak English. That was her, not miscompassionate, was she? But that was the ruling. So there were laws, there were Jose Crow laws like this that were in existence that basically segregated and discriminated against Latinos. Poll tax. You guys remember the poll tax? How much was the poll tax? $2? Elsa, excuse me. Let's see. Eva Bonilla is not here, but she said her father would make her go and try to collect poll taxes at like All Saints, and she said it was $3.50. And she said a guy would come up to her. He said, $3.50? That's a case of beer. And, oh no, it's more important that you vote than have a case of beer. Can't you forego the beer just one time? And so there was that struggle. $3.50 was a lot of money to people. Again, this is a Jim Crow law. It was a Jim Crow law implemented. And so there was a push to get rid of it. This is in Spanish that says, pay your poll tax. So basically you're putting a barrier, disenfranchising people by making that an element. Of course, that came from the southern states. Why? Because they were wanting to suppress the African American and Latino vote, is what was going on. Okay? Eventually got eliminated, became outlawed, in fact. It was rendered unconstitutional. The federal government basically said it was unconstitutional in 1966 for federal elections. The state of Texas continued for state elections until 1969. And so the poll tax was eliminated at that point. So I'm just going to quickly, Sam Garcia had, so is this America? What's our vision of America? And is there a no vacancy sign now? We kind of want to believe in the American dream. We want to believe, and this fact, this is a young lady in one of the Mexican parades demonstrating her belief. And this little boy too is mocking her with little, but want to believe that Lady Liberty is still dear to our hearts and all she represents to us. I was going to talk about Texas Rangers, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go through that. I'm not talking about the Cowboys. I'm talking about the guys down south. Politics. So what happens is you have a number of Mexican Americans, Mexicans coming to this country, uneducated, low income, low skilled, doing the menial work, doing the menial jobs, trying to survive day to day, trying to keep soul and family together. But finally, the next generation starts getting politically savvy and saying, you know, there is power in politics. And we graduated, we've graduated from college, we've become attorneys, doctors, sophisticated real estate agents, teachers, professors. We understand the rules now. And the rules are that if you're going to have a voice, then you need a voice at the decision-making level, of the policy-making. So people started getting involved in politics. No different here. So Luis Zapata, we talked about him being born in La Corte, and he never forgot that he lost his home. The city cheated his parents out of their property to build the Henderson 100th Street Bridge. He learned from early and bitter experience what government can do to the defenseless. That is why Fort Worth's first Mexican-American councilman devotes so much time to his public service time to protecting and helping people like his parents. He was motivated to do it. From personal experience. Born and raised in Fort Worth. So he was the first, Luis was the first city councilman. Carlos Puente, born in Corpus, but came up to go to college, graduated from UNT, graduated from UTA with a master's in urban studies, became the first school board member. After single member districting went into place, Fort Worth School District had to be sued in order to get single member district. They finally get it, and they allowed this gentleman from the north side to be elected. So he was the first school board member from 78 to 84, and decided to take on Luis Zapata for city council, beat him in 1991, and served as the second Latino city councilman. There is a discussion about should Latinos run against Latinos? Because what are we doing? Well, do not Anglos run against Anglos? Why should that be any different? Especially if you think that the incumbent really isn't doing a good job or representing your interests. So no different among Latinos. So this gentleman went ahead and challenged Luis Zapata, beat him, and became the first city council member, the first school board member and the second city council member. He was followed by the illustrious Sal Espino. He became the third Latino city councilman. You remember those numbers we saw? The population was like 34% in what was that, 2010? There is only one Latino city council member currently in Fort Worth. One. 2020 is coming. They're waiting to see what the census are going to be, because they've already passed that there's going to be an additional city council seat. And the rumor is the reason why, so that we can have another Latino representative. Because by that time, it's going to be up to 40 to 50% Latino in this city. And one city council member, I don't know, we have to take the look at this politics. Should our city representatives be representative of the diversity of the community? I mean, that's a discussion that goes on all the time. So in any case, he's announced his desire not to run for public office. So May will be his last month of service, which then opens it up to these three individuals who've thrown their hat in the ring. One of the points I want to make here, and one of the observations you probably made, is we've got a lot of males running for office, do we not, who have taken office. So the question has been raised among Latinos and possibly outside, where are the women representatives? Why have they not been elected to these positions? They make at least 50%, if not more, of the Latino population. And the old ways of, barefoot and pregnant and stay at home is not acceptable. In fact, if we go in another 40 minutes downtown Fort Worth, you'll find out what the women really think and feel. And the same with Latinas. They're wondering why are they not represented? Why is their voice not being heard on policy-making positions? Rightfully so. Rightfully so. So we have Jennifer Trevino running for city council. She's thrown her hat. We have Carlos Flores, North Side guy. They all live on the North Side. Long-term resident of North Side, graduate of All Saints. And she, by the way, was born in Joshua, but's been living in this area. I think she's the chief of staff at UNT Health Science Center, I believe. So, smart lady, graduate of TCU. And Steve Thornton, he's an ex-firefighter, retired, speaks Spanish very well. I heard him, I interviewed him one time, from San Antonio. He was raised among Latinos, so he knows the culture very well. So this will be a very interesting race. So far, only 3 have announced. There may be more out there, but these 3 certainly are going to have already decided that they're going to be considered. History. Pete Cepeda, first Latino Tarrant County College board member, 1983. He has a lot of firsts. The story with him is his parents, he was born in Nacogdoches. Came from Nacogdoches. His parents brought him in a covered wagon to Fort Worth and established his business. Went on to work at General Dynamics, first real estate agent, first headmaster of a Boy Scout club that was all Latinos. He was just very involved and active. He's now expired. His wife, Juanita Cepeda, was the first Latina to run for at that time, citywide city council race. She lost, but she was the first to try. Chico Perez, remember that movie, that sitcom, Chico and the Man? Well, he wanted to play off on that. Chico Perez, the first Latino police officer, Fort Worth police officer in 1954. He went on to become a constable, the first constable. You see what's happening? Now we're becoming more political. In the 60s, 70s, we're becoming more active and involved. Rachel Newman was also a school board member. So there have been some females who have made some political inroads. First, she was a school board member. Robin Medina Winnett was the first Latina on Tarrant County College Board. She was replaced by Teresa Ayala, who's currently on the TCC board. Arturo Peña, he was a school board member. This is Rosa Herrera, also a school board member. So we have at least 3 Latinas who made some political offices. Joe Ralph Martinez, a school board member. Carlos Vasquez, school board member. Juan Rangel, school board member. Both of these individuals were defeated. Jesse Martinez, school board member. Matthew Avila, current school board member. Jacinto Ramos, current school board member and president of the school board, currently, representing the North Side. Other individuals, we have Manuel Valdez, who was the second, he was a Justice of the Peace. I believe he's the first Latino Justice of the Peace, longtime resident of Fort Worth, replaced Sergio de Leon, and current Justice of the Peace. This was truly a first for us.